share what I've got here with you, and it's going to help you with those 3 Ps. I can see that some of that is going to be, some of what I'm going to talk about is going to be reflective of what Zoe's already spoken about. So I'm going to share my screen with you. We're going to, as Emma said, I'm an associate trainer with JAMI. We're going to be talking about managing mental health at work, but I'd like to open up that to, if you're seeking work, if you're working for yourself, if you're working for an employer, all of those things we'll be touching on. It's a broad brush that we're going to be talking about today. But first, a little bit more about what JAMI does. They're founded over 30 years ago to fill a gap in community mental health service provision and social care. There's a whole list of things that they would do normally, but with the pandemic, everything's moved online. And so there's now digital services through Quilt for adults and Couth for students, which are available. So today, we're going to be talking a bit about uncertainty and anxiety, something about resilience, some positive coping strategies. We're going to explore about how you feel, talk a bit about boundaries, and then talk something about self-care. We've heard a lot recently about how mental health has come to the top of an agenda. People talking about mental health in quite broad terms. But what's brought it on largely is the uncertainty that we've had in our lives over the last year. The answer to the question, could 2020 get any stranger, is probably yes. I'll just share a bit with you about my own personal experience over this last year. As Emma said, I set my own company up in 2018. 2019 saw me just stabilizing things. And then 2020, all of my work got cancelled in March as soon as the lockdown came. At home, I've got 2 adult sons live with us. My eldest works in the events industry and all of his work got cancelled and he's on furlough. And my youngest is on the spectrum looking for work. He just managed to secure himself a 3-month paid work experience contract in the end of February last year, and then that got cancelled. So my family are living with this, and I expect you and your families are living with this. Zoe spoke about sleep. Here's Charlie Brown, sits up in bed, can't switch off. He reckons his anxieties have got anxieties. It may be that some of you have experienced this type of feeling. And anxiety in of itself is a normal experience. It comes about through stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. You get this fight, flight, or freeze that may occur. I know that you can be, sat in the roundabout, sat in the car at something like, if you know Gants Hill, sat at Gants Hill roundabout and just be like, and you get this potential road rage, or you're on the email and someone says something and you get really annoyed or anxious about what's been there, and you get this perhaps email rage. It's a prehistoric response. It's a perfectly normal response, and it can be a helpful response. But if it continues, or we respond to it in different ways, then it can be unhelpful. some words here: adaptive, flexible, pragmatic, and viewing yourself with compassion, not criticism. I think quite often people criticize themselves, especially if you work for yourself. You quite often go, I should have done this. I should have done that. Oh, I'm stupid because I forgot this. And I think viewing yourself with compassion means that you change that language slightly so that it would be, I'd rather I'd done it that way. I can program these things in later. But by taking on some of these types of activities, these types of ways of feeling, it actually helps us become more resilient. The resilience isn't about not reacting to things. Resilience is the capacity to bounce back. It's how we manage adversity. Someone's described resilience to me as but like being like a rubber ball. So a rubber ball bounces, but it actually doesn't say solid in as such. It actually moves with the force and then is able to bounce back. The most resilient people are often those who've come through adversity and learned from it. You can learn from other people about how they've coped with experiences. We're going to talk a little bit later about having conversations with people and who you might have conversations with. But don't think that being resilient is not reacting. Don't think that being resilient is, it is having a certain toughness, but it's going through that experience and adapting to it and bouncing back from that adversity. Some of the positive ways that we can cope with anxiety are listed here. I really like this little cartoon. You have to delegate some authority. The Queen is telling the King, no, it's not his responsibility to be painting those yellow lines down the road. But I was thinking about this. If I'm self-employed and there's only me to do it, who is going to paint those yellow lines down the road? And it could well be that you're going to have to be realistic in setting your goals. Do I need to paint the yellow lines? Can it wait till tomorrow? Could you get someone else to do it? So there's a realism that you have to have when you set goals for yourself, especially if you're self-employed. You need to be able to state what it is that you want and be assertive. But being assertive isn't the same as being aggressive. Being assertive is about stating what you need, what you want. Social support systems, I think with this lockdown, with the lack of social interaction that's in real time that we've had, what I've found is I have two regular Zoom calls a week with other business owners who work on their own. They're in other areas of the country. They're people that I've met doing business, and there's people that I've met and I've become friends with them. But we actually set aside time every week to talk to each other. We don't talk about work necessarily, although we can if we want. We have those conversations just really which are really helpful from both ways. Just having the conversation and I think Zoe spoke about that in terms of just having the conversations, talking about things. Self-organize. I have lists And it may well be that the list has, first thing on the list is write another list. But so I know what I've got to do, when I'm going to do it. And it really helps. And I think in the same, I was impressed with when I was listening to Zoe earlier. She was talking about writing down in the middle of the night. I think that's quite often I've found that if you write down what's worrying you, that actually helps because you've parked it on that piece of paper, something for you to deal with. Check in with others, that goes with the social support, because sometimes, especially if you're self-employed, you can be looking at this huge problem, but if you're checking in with others, you can talk to them about it. You can see, is this as big as a problem as I think it is? Can I deal with it tomorrow or next week? Looking after yourself, I think that later on there's a session that's going to be talking about food, but remember that what you eat and drink and the exercise you take are all really helpful coping strategies. Exercise, and I'm going to talk about exercise in another respect in a little while. Exercise is a really helpful thing. Even if it's just going for a walk or whatever you can manage, it's just a helpful thing. Making sure that you have drunk enough. It's really easy to get dehydrated because you're so busy doing what you're doing. And then taking regular breaks. I can't emphasize it enough in terms of you can be much more productive if you just take some time to recharge. You need to be somewhat self-aware in terms of recognizing how you actually feel. And with those trusted contacts that you have, expressing the way that you feel openly with others is really helpful, because people can't see inside you in terms of knowing how to react to you. It may be that if you speak about it, then they can say, oh yeah, I feel like that too, or when I felt like this is what helped for me. Practice rational thinking. If you have that self conversation, which is, I should have done this thing, I feel so stupid because I didn't do it, or I forgot that I had to do it, you're already painting yourself with this, or describing yourself with this label that's unwarranted. You need to think about what evidence is there for the way that I feel, and try to be more rational about what it is that you're thinking. And just to reiterate, if you can establish and make use of a good social support network, that's really helpful. I saw right at the beginning, and someone had asked about, can we speak specifically about work? And in terms of speaking specifically about work, these are the three main things that I would suggest that you need to be able to do at work. Communication, communication, communication. It doesn't matter whether you're at work or on furlough, you're working remotely, you're in the office. This is absolutely key. If you're a line manager or a business owner and you have staff, have regular team meetings. And the team meeting won't necessarily have a strictly business agenda. It's, especially in these times where we're working separately from each other, it's a chance just to come together. I've worked with some organizations that have a regular Monday morning meeting. The purpose of the meeting is just to see each other, check in with each other, have a cup of coffee together, and then they might get onto an agenda of what we need to do next week or this week. But the main purpose of that is to have that conversation, to pick up any worries that people might have. As a manager, it's important to check in with people one-to-one. They may not want to share in that team meeting, so having the option to have a one-to-one meeting is really helpful. If you have employees on furlough, they are still your employees. You still need to be communicating with them. How it works for your organization, how it works for you as an individual, whether you're a team leader, whether you're a manager, or whether you're a member of staff, just engage with the communication. If you're not having those team meetings, it might be helpful to suggest that those team meetings happen. But again, it's that opportunity to express yourself, to be able to talk, and to just share problems and issues. The problem that you're having at work might be the same problem that someone else is having at work, but they've worked out a solution which they can share with you. This subject of boundaries can be quite difficult in terms of, well, what do I mean by boundaries? How are your boundaries? Let me give you an example that's absolutely relevant for right now. So I'm working at home. It doesn't matter whether I'm an employee or I'm self-employed, but I'm working at home. Where does work start and where does home finish when I'm working at home? If I'm sat at the dining table with my laptop open, when I'm eating my dinner, am I at work or am I at home? Because probably the laptop's still open. I'm still sneaking a peek at the emails that are coming in. And that means that there's the boundary between work and home has eroded somewhat. Someone suggested to me that there's one way that you can actually help with this work at home boundary issue is if you take your regular exercise, your normal walk or your cycle ride or something, what you do is you set yourself up a fake commute. So in the morning, you get up, you get ready for work, and you go for your walk or your cycle ride, and you leave home. You go for your exercise, and when you come home, actually, you haven't come home, you've come to work. So there's a division in your mind about what's happening with your life. So I'm now at work, you then work for the period of time that you work for, you finish work, and then you do a fake commute home. So you go out, go for a little more exercise, you leave work, go for the exercise, and when you come home, you are coming home. Work's all put away. So hopefully you can divide your time. You don't have to be strict like that. That works for some people. But having boundaries helps with resilience. It's limits that you set for yourself. There may be some boundaries that have to be set by the work that you do, by the organization you work with, but your boundaries are your boundaries. And it might mean that boundaries are imaginary lines. They're not strict, fixed lines. And if you have really, really strict fixed lines, that means sometimes that makes you an island. They have to be somewhat flexible. But it can be that if someone's asking you to do something that you really can't do, you can't manage to do, you don't want to do for a particular reason, having the boundary there means that you should be able to say that instead of saying no, what you could be saying is, I'd prefer not to do this because of this reason, or I'd rather not do that as whatever the reason is. State your position positively. I could do it if, or can we discuss timescales? And that going back to being assertive. some people get really upset because people step over their boundaries, and quite often it's because people didn't know what your boundary was. So you need to be able to state clearly what your boundaries are, what you're able to do, what you're not able to do. But really know yourself, how you want to be treated yourself, so that you can express that clearly to others. But boundaries do mean all sorts of things to different people. So I can only just touch on a few of the examples of boundaries in this session, really. Just looking at self-care, and I'd just like you to spend just a couple of moments just thinking about these questions yourself. I don't necessarily want you to share with me, but I just really want you to think about these. It's like, when was the last time you actually asked for help? Or when was the last time you admitted you needed a break? When did you last prioritize your self-care? And it says here, when was the last time you held a boundary? But have you actually held boundaries? Because I think some people find it really difficult to hold boundaries. I'd say that if I was answering this, the last time I asked for help was probably yesterday, and it was one of my regular Zoom calls. I was talking to my friend and saying, I've got this and I've got that. Which do I do first? I can't do everything. And we just had a chat and we worked that through. I had a break yesterday. I actually was really, really busy yesterday and went, right, no, I'm going for a walk. Last time you prioritized your self-care, I think that in terms of self-care, going for the walk was one of those things that I did. And oh, I realised there's an additional word crept in there. You said held a boundary. No, it's you held a boundary. And I think holding those boundaries, I think for me, I try to hold a boundary every day between work and home. I'm not always successful, but if I'm not successful, I just I'm on that. I'd prefer to have done it that way rather than beating myself up over it. I've got another question for you. Why is self-care so important right now, possibly more than ever? I'd be happy if people could type something into the chat box and we'll just see what people come up with. I know there's 50 of you. If there's 51 answers, we're not going to be able to go through all of them. But let's just think about this for a moment and type into the chat box some of the things that you might think that are why self-care is important right now. So I've got some answers. So thanks for sharing. To look after our own well-being, not burn ourselves out, to enable you to move forward positively. A lot of structure and boundaries we had in place aren't there. It's always important, yes, Eva, to enable one, not help yourself. I think that's to help yourself and your family to make it through. Well-being, being well, there's uncertainty. Look after yourself. Thanks very much, everyone. I think that the answers that I've got really reflect what you're saying. You can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're used up, you haven't taken that self-care, you can't, there's nothing there to give. It boosts your motivation, your productivity. It does aid physical health, and it helps to look after our mental health, because if you're taking that physical exercise, if you're eating and drinking properly, then that helps with the physical health. And if you can be as physically healthy as you can be, then that really does help with your mental health. Not There's no one thing that works for everyone. Here's a pick and mix in terms of, if there's things that you'd like to do for self-care, or there's things that you do for self-care, and you'd like to think of other things, then there's other things you can do. There's mindfulness. It doesn't work for everyone, but a lot of people find mindfulness is really helpful. Listening to music, thinking about food as well as eating food. I think the thoughts, being more thoughtful about food is quite helpful in terms of deciding what you're going to do to eat more healthily, trying to take time to relax or to meditate. That can be helpful. Some people just can't get into those spaces of meditation or relaxation, but other people might find that reading is helpful. A really good book. There's some GPs will be prescribing books to read in terms of to help with people's mental well-being. And then thinking about how well you sleep. I think Zoe talked about sleep. Where do you sleep? Uh, well, this duck seems to be sleeping at work while they're watching a movie, while they're trying to drive, but they're wide awake lying in bed at night. Sleep is a difficult thing. If it becomes difficult, it can become difficult. I mean, I personally have used the Sleepio app, which I found quite helpful. It's a free app that you can download, and it talks you through a number of things that you can do. I mean, Zoe did talk about not having the devices on, but there's all sorts of other advice in terms of what you can do. But I think sometimes getting stressed about not sleeping actually induces the inability to sleep in and of itself. There's only 6 things on this screen. There's probably a huge number of other things. But I'll just share with you. So, a friend of mine a couple of years ago said, because I was saying to him that I felt quite stressed, he said, "Do you want to go fishing? Fishing's brilliant." He said, "Because you just go fishing, you sat there, you're out there, you're just looking at the water, you're doing this fishing." And I went, "Right." And he said, "And that's what works for me." So I said, "Okay, great." He said, "Come fishing with me." So I said, "All right." I went fishing with him. I'll tell you, I was so bored. I was so bored. And it was worth trying, but it didn't work for me. But I'm sure that there'll be some people that fishing works for. And I'll just say that for any of the things that you might try or someone recommends, try them. If it doesn't work for you, don't stress over it. Move on and try something else. I've got to the end of the formal part of the presentation. If there's anything else, I'm happy to take questions in the chat box. Emma, if you'd like to talk me through any of the questions that are there. I can't promise that I can answer any question. And one thing that I say to people, if you don't know the answer, say I don't know. And so that's what I'll do. If I don't know what the answer is, I'll be totally honest with you.
Well, we have had some questions, so I'm going to take them in the order that they arrived. They've been sort of filtering in as we've been going. So a questioner has asked, I've been lucky to be able to put some work on hold whilst having to deal with life at home and homeschooling. In other words, as we are during, the pandemic, a situation common to us all. It took a while to accept I had to do this, but I managed to do it. However, with kids going back to school, my concern is how quickly I can switch myself back on and bounce back. Do you have any tips to focus the mind? Great question.
I think that in terms of focusing, it's a question of making time for yourself, having that capacity. So it would be knowing what you want to do, because it's really difficult to give you any specific advice in terms of those particular things, because it's about you yourself. So if you know what it is you want to do, then have lists of things of what you want to get done. Having setting time aside for yourself and for those other things you need to get done. But in terms of, it's you've got everything on hold and then everything's running at 100 miles an hour. It's about knowing what it is you need to do first, thinking about that, prioritizing things, making lists, but also keeping time for yourself so that you are able to get the things done that you need to get done.
Lovely, thank you. I've had another question from someone who says, do you have any additional advice on how to express our feelings and thoughts to others openly? What kind of language can we use to express ourselves from the heart? Because many times we might feel anxiety about saying something wrong or being misunderstood, and we don't say what we really think or feel.
It's going to depend who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone that you trust, then you should be able to talk to that person. You should be able to express yourself the way you feel. And it's really difficult, because if you're talking to someone that you're not sure of, then you will hold back in terms of what you're going to be saying. It's difficult to give you guidance in terms of what to say, because it depends on what you need to say. What do you feel that you can say? But share within the limits that you feel comfortable with, because you won't necessarily want to share everything with everyone. So be selective in who you share with, so that you feel you're comfortable within yourself about that sharing. I don't think I can be much more specific than that, because the language you use is going to be your language, the language that expresses how you feel. And I can't give you the language that about how you feel yourself. It's about how you feel. And if you're with a person that you trust sufficiently, then you should be able to be yourself with them.
I also think, as you kind of alluded to, Nick, that every situation has its own context and its own circumstances. So much depends upon all of those different factors.
Absolutely. I might have a conversation myself with one of my very best friends I've known since we were 14 years old. And in some context, when I'm talking to him, it's a very, not formal, but I work with him. We have a business conversation, But other times when we're on a Zoom call together, or we're just having a chat with a drink or something to eat, we'll have a completely different conversation. So even if you're talking to the same person, the context that you're speaking to them in changes the content of what you're saying.
Thank you. So we've had another question which changes the tone quite, a little bit here, from Jill, who asks, what happens if your boss knows no boundaries and expects you to be available either at 7:30 in the morning or 7:30 in the evening, and to work nights even when you've never had to before? So basically, how do you teach your employer boundaries? Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a number of different answers here, and again, it's going to be dependent on you. And I wouldn't like to give you advice, but just give you some pointers in terms of what you should do. It could be that you need to state those boundaries to your employer and actually say what it is you can and can't do, and be clear about that. It is difficult, and as I said earlier, if you're able to state it positively about what you can do, then, or what assistance you might need, or when you wouldn't be able to do it, that can be helpful. Employers can be difficult in that sense, but I'm not sure that they necessarily always are trying to be difficult. I think that that conversation, if you can have that conversation with them so that you can clarify that situation between you, that's probably going to be the first step in working it out. We can go down all sorts of hypothetical avenues about what happens after that. But I think taking that first step in actually stating what your needs are, what your abilities are in terms of those boundaries, would be my first step in that scenario given.
I think it's also worth remembering that sometimes, employers aren't, as Nick said, doing these things to be difficult or unpleasant, but they're under pressures of their own. They have their own mental health and their own mental well-being to consider, and their own agenda to consider, often which is driving some of their things. So, as Nick said, to open up a conversation in a rational and calm moment, a non-stressed moment, might be a good starting point, and you might learn things and help you understand your employer's situation as well sometimes, and come potentially to an understanding that can work from both parties. I don't know what your thoughts are, Nick. Yeah.
No, absolutely. That's exactly the
They're human
place.
beings as well.
Absolutely. That's exactly the thing that I was alluding to.
Yeah.
In terms of a conversation is a two-way thing. So you'd be hearing what they're saying as well as hopefully they're hearing what you're saying. So you can come to a better understanding. And that conversation may assist with that understanding. And if there's more understanding, then it may well be that your boundaries will be better respected. But having an understanding of where they're coming from and why they're coming that way can make it less confrontational perhaps than it may be otherwise. Because if you just sort of hold in yourself in terms of, they keep asking me this and they keep asking me that and they expect me to be here then and but you haven't actually gone back to them and said, this is the way it makes me feel, this is what I'm also trying to do at this time.
Exactly. And we've had a question, very topical question, as Boris Johnson set out the roadmap for the next few months. We've had a very topical question from Leslie, who asks, what can an employer do to make the workplace welcoming and understanding when opening the office again?
I'd go back to my slide that I put up with communication.
Yes.
In some ways, I mean, it depends on how open the office is. Currently, there's some offices that are already open, but there's social distancing that's in the office. It's going to depend on, do we have to still have social distancing in the office? Is it an open plan office? Are we in individual pods in the office? So those are things that are quite dependent on your own office environment, the relationships between people and between teams. But actually, for the workplace to decide what they need to do, they're going to have to look at the physical characteristics of what they're going to need to do, but then also be able to communicate that with people. It may be that, and I've had a conversation with someone saying it's actually better on Zoom to have a conversation than it is face to face, because face to face we're wearing masks, so I can't actually see their face.
Interesting.
And so much of a conversation or the communication is non-verbal, and if you're wearing a mask, you're covering a lot of that up. It's going to be dependent on all sorts of things. Is it a big office? Is it a small office? As I say, is it open plan? Is it individual offices? But I think meeting people, communicating with people, so that the employer can explain what they're doing to keep the environment safe, what they're doing to reopen, what the expectations are of staff, and then for staff to express their concerns about perhaps their travel into work, the times that they might be able to come to work. Just in terms of mediating those discussions between the parties, I think is going to be the helpful thing to get back to what people might be calling the new normal.
Yeah. Another new normal.
Another
Yes,
new normal,
yes,
indeed.
exactly. Thank you. I've had another question. Someone picked up on something, you referred to social support networks as being really, really important. But they say that theirs are very weak. They just don't have great networks. What tips can you suggest in that situation?
Okay, you can reach out to an organisation like JAMI. There may be support that's available there if they really need support. It can be that it depends on what they mean by weak, and it's again, that's a difficult
Of course.
a difficult thing to think about, in the sense of that social support network. If you have an interest in a particular thing, then there's online groups with particular interests. So if you've got a shared interest in something, then you can join with those other groups. So I have a particular interest in classic Japanese Kawasaki two-stroke triple motorcycles. It's quite a niche interest. And I have a social support network from that by joining the club. We have a common interest. I might not agree with the other people and a lot of things that they talk about, but I have a shared interest with them about Kawasaki triple motorcycles. We talk about Kawasaki triple motorcycles, and it's a helpful social support network. And one of the guys there, he works for himself. We'd had a conversation 3 or 4 years ago, and it was one of the conversations I had with him that helped me become self-employed myself, because he was self-employed. But I don't necessarily agree with him about anything else. But that's social. But having a shared interest. So if you've got something you're interested in, and you can see that there's a group or a club, and a lot of the time now there's online presence. That can be helpful to help with your social support networks. It isn't necessarily about talking about your mental health. It's about having a shared interest, about talking about things you enjoy, because that is what social support is. It's just having that those shared interests, that shared humanity with someone.
And one other question, you referred earlier to rational thinking as trying to sort of bring your rational thinking to the fore. Can you elaborate on that a bit more, please?
Yes.
What rational thinking is and how we can do that.
Okay, I think this is one of the things that I thought people would ask about, and people will say, when I'm really stressed, I can't be rational.
Exactly.
How can, it's like if you're not calm, someone says to you, calm down. It's not helpful in that sort of sense, if you look at it just boldly like that. But what I mean by being rational, and that's why I had the additional phrase there, which was look for evidence. If you're in a position where you are thinking, oh, it's all too much, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm quite stressed or I'm quite anxious about something, just take a moment and think more about what is actually happening. If you've got that if you've got that friend that you can talk to them to help look at the evidence, but you can look at the evidence yourself in terms of trying to break down, why is it I'm feeling this way? What is going on? Have I got evidence for the way that I'm feeling? And again, with the language that you use to describe yourself, that can be, you've used language to describe yourself, I'm so stupid because I forgot to do that. And you have to break that down in terms of, I'm saying that I'm so stupid, but what evidence have I got for that? I don't have any. I would have preferred not to have done it. It's, if you are completely overwhelmed with sort of stress and anxiety, it is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And so rather than doing that, what you might actually take time to do is take time to take a walk around the block. And in that period of time of going for a walk and trying to think about, I'm putting one foot in front of the other, what can I see? You might actually start to find that you've got the space to start to rationally think about things, to actually think about things without the surroundings that have been causing some of that stress. You've taken yourself out of the situation. You're able to think about it in a bigger picture, perhaps. Everyone is different. Those things might not work for you. Other people might find, well, just do some deep breathing and just try and think about things. What works for me is if I just go for a walk, and by the time I've walked for a bit, I think, yeah, actually, my notebook is in my pocket when I go for a walk. I know Zoe was saying her notebook was by the bed. My notebook is in my pocket, and I'll write down a few things in the notebook as I'm going for a walk, and then it's parked. You're looking for evidence about the way you feel. You're trying to be rational. It says be rational. It's about trying. It's about, and if you are not successful, then just keep trying in terms of trying to make space for yourself. Be compassionate with yourself. Don't beat yourself up over it. Hopefully that has answered that to the extent I can answer it.
Yeah, it has. Thank you very much, Nick. I'm conscious of time. This session is scheduled to finish in 3 minutes, so that's quite neat. I want to. I don't know if you want to exit the screen share, Nick, and bring us all back.
Okie dokie. I've been. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
Okay,
there we are.
fabulous. So, we're coming to the end of this session, which has been absolutely super, absolutely fabulous. You've covered so much ground, and it's so helpful to hear it from a professional who can take a perspective with such a reassuring tone as well, to guide us through some of the stresses and anxieties, and provide some, really down to earth and sensible and practical thoughts and perspectives on the issue as well. JAMI, Nick is an associate trainer at an organisation called JAMI, which some of you, many of you may be aware of. It's our community's leading organisation for mental health. And anyone who is seeking additional support should certainly be in touch with JAMI. That would be a very, a sensible pathway to take, sensible signpost to take. We at Work Avenue also, we understand only too well the stresses and strains associated with people's well-being, specifically in the domain of working, seeking to work, starting a business, developing a business, becoming entrepreneurial. It puts us all under immense pressures from time to time for some, and fairly frequently for others. We understand these fields, and we're very, very happy to support you, provide information, advice and guidance as well in that field. Nick, I want to thank you again. It's been a super session.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the time you've taken this morning. We're now having a 10-minute break. Our next session will start at 11:30, enough time for everyone to take a comfort break and get a coffee or some refreshment. The two choices, which I'm sure you're all aware of from your schedule, are either Eating Your Way to Mental Health, which is run by Nikki Mann, who's a qualified nutritionist. Alternatively, Calm Amidst the Chaos, run by Joe Kay, who is founder of the Breathe Academy. They will both be super sessions, so take your pick from one of two excellent sessions. I thank you all for joining Nick and me in this session today. Grateful thanks to you all. I'm going to close the session off now. All the best and many thanks. Bye-bye now.